Welcome to today's story, and before we begin, if you could hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and share this with your friends and family, that would be absolutely wonderful. Okay, so what we got today is a great story, in my opinion, and I just want to remind you, do not forget to find the hidden clue throughout, and to put what it is in the timestamp in the comments to be pinned and entered into the giveaway. So with that being said, it's time to get into today's story. So as of now, it's time to slip into a mind that's not our own. Now, this is the story of two women, unknown to one another, drawn together by a terrible tragedy. One, Melanie Uribe, was a nurse working at Pacoima Memorial Hospital in Burbank, California. Now, Melanie was 31 years old. She was an attractive brunette. She was also divorced, and she was the mother of her 8-year-old son. Now, she loved her job, and she was known to her superiors and her colleagues as very dependable. So it was unthinkable that she would ever miss a shift without calling in, yet on the evening of December 15th, 1980, that was exactly what happened. Now, Melanie failed to show and all calls to her residence went unanswered. Now, the other woman in the story is named Etta Smith. Now, Etta was 32 years old, and in 1980, she worked at Lockheed Aerospace as a shipping clerk. Now, like Melanie, she was liked and respected by her colleagues. Now, Etta entered the picture on December 17th, 2 days after Melanie's no-show at work. Now, Etta was just listening to the news on the radio when she heard a report about the missing nurse, and the police were conducting house-to-house searches in Melanie Uribe's neighborhood. Then suddenly, out of nowhere, a vision just flashed across Etta's mind. A vision so clear it could have been written in 20-foot tall letters across a flashing billboard. "She's not in the house," the vision said. And the police by now had learned some troubling things about Melanie's disappearance. Melanie had not simply vanished, she had been abducted. Now, eyewitnesses had seen a woman pull her pickup truck to a stop at a traffic light. They'd then seen two men force their way into the vehicle and then seen them drive off with Melanie. But then the police also already found the truck, and it was burned to a crisp in a remote area. I mean, these sounded like professionals. And Melanie's white uniform laid on the ground beside it. But when it came to Melanie, there was no trace of her at all. And so far, they had been unable to find her. And it was here that Etta Smith got involved. Now, Etta's vision had not ended at the simple revelation that Melanie was not inside a residence. What followed was something that, according to her later account, was like a movie. Very, very clear. And in it, she saw a canyon and a curving road and shrubbery to either side. Plus, there were a bunch of hills in the background and a dirt path leading from the road toward something white that was lying on the ground. Etta believed that the white might have represented Melanie's uniform and that it marked the spot where her body was. But, I mean, what would she do with this information? I mean, for one, Etta had never experienced anything like this in her life before and certainly did not consider herself a psychic. I mean, how would the police take it if she suddenly showed up talking about visions? I mean, would they take her to a psych ward? Would they accuse her of wasting their time? Or would they arrest her? And Etta was scared and didn't know how it would turn out. But she knew that she had to share what she had saw. She knew that the resolution of the case might depend upon it. So leaving work early that day, she headed directly to the Foothill Community Police Station in Pacoima. Now, the response that she got was just about what she expected. I mean, the cop who interviewed her, Detective Lee Ryan, he was polite but skeptical. It was only Etta's high-level security clearance at Lockheed that dissuaded him from showing her the door. I mean, think about it. This wasn't just some crazy person off the street. This was a trusted employee of a serious company, And eventually Ryan pointed to a map and asked Etta to show him the area where she believed Melanie's body would be found. Etta right then did so without hesitation, pointing to Lopez Canyon, which was a remote part of the San Fernando Valley above Lakeview Terrace. Ryan then thanked her for the information and promised to send a search team. Then Etta left the precinct building, feeling kind of underwhelmed by the police response. And Ryan had listened, but she did not believe that he had taken her seriously. But I mean, could you really blame him? So right away after that, she decided that she wasn't going to wait for the police to search the whole area whenever that might be. She was going to round up some friends and family and carry out the search herself. And just hours later, she was driving her car along a familiar stretch of road, the same road she had seen in her vision. Now, at this moment, she was cruising slowly toward the top of the canyon, and Etta was overcome by a strange and unpleasant sensation. She felt as though she could feel Melanie's presence and could sense her trauma plus the fear. Now, she was more certain now than ever that Melanie was in this place. Something was telling her to turn her car around and head back to that road. And this is when here she spotted tire tracks and somehow knew that that vehicle had been the vehicle that was involved in this. Then further down the canyon, Etta was again overcome by a feeling of deja vu. This area she was now driving through was just like the place she had seen in her vision. The road with dense undergrowth to each side, and the hills in the distance, and the path leading into the shrubbery. And then Etta's daughter, sitting in the passenger seat, shouted out for her to stop. She'd seen something. And it was just at this time that Etta saw it too. And it was a person watching this on YouTube that all of a sudden got the instinctual urge to hit the subscribe button and to absolutely swipe right on the like button like your favorite Tinder profile. Wait a minute, sorry. Whew. I'm hallucinating again. Okay, so what they both saw was a pair of white uniform shoes protruding from a bush. Melanie had been found. Melanie Uribe, a woman who had dedicated her life to the service and care of others, had met a truly horrific end. Melanie had been savagely clubbed to death with a rock, suffering terrible head trauma. And before that, she had been subjected to brutal sexual assault by more than one perpetrator. And whoever had done this was still at large, posing a serious threat to the community. The police should have been putting all their resources behind finding them. Instead, their attention was focused on elsewhere. It was focused on, of all people, Etta Smith. Now, the very evening that Melanie's body was found, Etta was taken into custody. How, the police demanded, could she have known the location of the body? Etta told them what she told the detective Ryan before. It had come to her in a vision. And that drew, snorts of ridicule and mockery. Homicide investigators are skeptics at nature. They place, little faith in that paranormal mumbo jumbo. But Etta was insistent because she knew exactly how she came by this information and she wasn't backing down. And when she continued to assert that she had no knowledge of the crime other than the image that had come to her, the detectives insisted that she take a polygraph. Etta agreed. And this is why I love supernatural stories, because of course, she passed. However, the police still would not believe her story. Yet think about it, that if the polygraph came back as her failing, the police definitely would have nailed her to the cross right there and then. They told her that she was being deceptive, and that they noticed her trying to control her breathing as she gave her responses. Etta said that she was just nervous, and I don't know how many of you have taken a lie detector test, but regardless of what it's about, you are going to be nervous. It's just the atmosphere that they put you in. They know they're making you nervous because they want you to slip up. And some believe that there's a more sinister reason, and that's to accumulate false positives. Now, the detective suggested that she was either involved in the murder or knew who it was. Then they accused her of lying to financially gain from this. by claiming the reward that was offered. And almost in tears at this point, Etta denied the scandalous accusation. And of course, the police responded by charging her with murder. Now, there is zero chance that Etta Smith would ever have been convicted on this charge, or that any DA in his right mind, or their right mind, would have put this case before a jury. But as it turned out, luckily, it would not come to that, because the case was solved soon after, and not by a psychic, but a criminal who could not keep his mouth shut. Now, a police informant tipped detectives off to a 21-year-old named Louis Carnell Morgan, who had been bragging about abducting, sexually assaulting, and murdering that nurse. So Morgan was soon put under arrest and quickly gave up his accomplices, 20-year-old Spencer Nelson and an unnamed 17-year-old. Now, once in custody, this disgraceful trio started talking, describing the terrible last hour of Melanie's life. You know, they had ambushed her at the stoplight, driven her about 15 miles north to Lopez Canyon, forced her to undress, and taken turns sexually assaulting her. They had then beaten her to death with a large rock, even as she begged for her life, and told them that she had a little boy at home who needed her. Now, Morgan and Nelson were convicted of murder and given long jail sentences. Now, Etta Smith at this point, meanwhile, had been released from police custody after spending 4 days behind bars. Now, during her first 24 hours, she had been deliberately deprived of food and water in an attempt to break her. And she left without so much as an apology. She later sued LAPD and received a payout of around $26,000. If you ask me, she should have got at least 10 times that. Etta Smith had never had a single instance of precognition until that December day when she heard the news report on the abduction of Melanie. Now, what was it that triggered this fatal vision? So clear that it could have been a movie playing in her head? We don't know. And neither does Etta. But she did say during an interview, "I sometimes wonder what it was that transpired from this innocent person who was murdered and how her death somehow reached out and touched me. I think it's one of those mysteries in life that many things happen to us that are just unexplainable." I as well am not sure how this worked, but I have in my personal life had similar experiences, not to this extent, but of a dream of a friend kind of asking for help, and then the dream fades away, and when I woke up in the morning later that day, I heard 1,000 miles away that he had passed away. Now, my vision was nowhere near as detailed as Etta's, but it does make you think. Sometimes, is there some cosmic relation that can be served up through our consciousness, or maybe even the unconscious mind? Very fascinating stuff.